Imagine a company so powerful that it didn't just have customers. It had a private army, a corporation so wealthy that it didn't just pay taxes. It collected them from entire nations. This isn't a dystopian science fiction story. This was real. Long before the existence of Google, Amazon, or Apple, there was one name that made kings tremble and changed the map of the world forever. They started as a group of merchants in a small, cramped London office and ended up ruling over 200 million people. But behind the aromatic spice trade and the fine silk curtains lay a dark trail of blood, systematic corruption, and the greatest corporate heist in human history. Welcome to the terrifying story of the East India Company. In the year 1600, Queen Elizabeth I signed a royal charter that would alter the course of civilization. At that time, the world was obsessed with spices. Nutmeg, cloves, and pepper were more valuable than gold. They were the oil of the 17th century, essential for preserving food and masking the taste of decay. A group of daring London businessmen wanted a piece of the action, which was tightly controlled by the Dutch and the Portuguese at the time. They didn't start as conquerors. They started as venture capitalists. Their first voyages were terrifying gambles where investors pooled their money to share the risk. Ships frequently disappeared in violent storms. Entire crews died of scurvy, and many vessels never returned. But the ones that did, they brought back profits so massive that they broke the scales of the London economy. We are talking about 300% to 400% returns on a single trip. The fire of corporate greed was ignited, and there was no turning back. As the decades passed, the company realized that simply trading wasn't enough to satisfy their shareholders. To maximize profits, they needed to control the source. In India, the once mighty Mughal Empire was beginning to fracture into smaller, warring states. The company saw a golden opportunity in this chaos. They didn't just bring merchant ships anymore. They brought heavy cannons and professional mercenaries. The ultimate turning point came at the Battle of Plassey in 1757. Through a web of betrayal, massive bribery, and superior military force, the company's private army defeated the Nawab of Bengal. Imagine the scale of this. A private, for-profit corporation now owned one of the richest provinces on the face of the earth. They were no longer just merchants. They were the absolute masters of India. They began to mint their own currency, dictate their own laws, and build a private military force that was eventually twice the size of the official British Royal Army. To understand how deep their influence went, we have to look at the American Revolution. Most people don't realize that the famous Boston Tea Party was actually a protest against the East India Company. The British government had granted the company a monopoly to sell tea in the American colonies, bypassing local merchants. It was this corporate interference, backed by the crown, that pushed the colonists to throw that tea into the harbor. While they were triggering revolutions in the West, they were poisoning empires in the East. To fix a massive trade imbalance with China, the company began illegally smuggling vast amounts of opium into Chinese ports. They turned millions of people into addicts just to ensure the flow of silver and tea back to London. When the Chinese government tried to stop them, the company used its influence to trigger the Opium Wars. It was a clear message to the world. Nothing, not even the laws of a sovereign nation, would stand in the way of company profits. This is where the story turns truly dark. The company's primary goal was the enrichment of its shareholders in London, never the welfare of the people they ruled. In India, they forced local farmers to grow opium and tea instead of essential food crops. They manipulated market prices and systematically drained the wealth of an entire continent. In 1770, a massive famine struck the region of Bengal. Millions were starving to death in the streets. Yet, the company refused to lower taxes or provide relief. In fact, they notoriously increased tax collection during the height of the crisis to protect their quarterly dividends. It is estimated that 10 million people perished while the company's warehouses remained full of grain, waiting to be sold for a higher profit elsewhere. This was corporate greed at its most lethal. They were effectively a state within a state, answerable to no one but their own balance sheets and the aristocrats in London who grew rich off these tragedies. But no empire lasts forever, especially one built on a foundation of such extreme exploitation. The corruption within the company became so grand that it started to threaten the stability of the British economy itself. Senior officials, known as nabobs, were returning to England with so much stolen wealth that they were literally buy their way into seats in Parliament, corrupting British politics from the inside. The end finally began in 1857, when the Great Indian Rebellion broke out. The people had reached their breaking point. The ensuing war was brutal, bloody, and shook the world. Although the British military eventually regained control, the international scandal was too much for the government to ignore. The British Crown finally stepped in, stripped the company of its powers, and nationalized its assets. The world's most powerful corporation was finally dissolved, leaving behind a scarred continent. The East India Company left a legacy that we still live with today. They pioneered the modern corporate structure, the concept of the joint stock company, and the first truly global supply chains. They showed the world how much wealth could be generated by a single entity. But they also provided a chilling historical lesson on how dangerous a corporation can become when it possesses more power than a government and operates without a moral compass. They were the original too big to fail, and their story serves as a permanent reminder. When profit becomes the only motive for existence, the human cost is always treated as a secondary concern.